or you want to talk about the latest article at the Grayzone about the Bibas family deception perpetrated by Israel and its supporters?
Well, Wyatt Reed and I did what I think is one of the more authoritative takedowns of the official propaganda. But just to kind of like set the scene, the Empire State Building was lit up in memory of 3 people who are not even US citizens, who were Israeli citizens, who were kidnapped taken hostage on October 7th, Shiri Kafir and Ariel Bibas, and who lost their lives in the Gaza Strip, who were killed in the Gaza Strip. Shining in orange tonight to honor the memories of Shiri, Ariel, and Kafir Bibas. This is the Empire State Building. I mean, did it ever light up for one of the 18,000 and more kids slaughtered in the Gaza Strip by Israel's killing machine in the last 16 months? Of course not. The Empire State Building is effectively owned by Zionist billionaire Peter Malkin. He's the chair of the Malkin Group that owns it. He's also the father-in-law of Connecticut Senator and neocon warmonger Richard Blumenthal. No relation to me. Who controls America? Who's in charge here? I mean, this isn't even for Americans. This is insane. And how were they killed? Israel says that they were killed by the bare hands of Hamas militants, which is strange. Why would you just strangle some kids for no reason, just for sheer enjoyment because you're a sadistic psychopath, when you had orders to take human collateral and you have hundreds of children in prison, in Israeli prisons, who you want to get out? You're losing collateral. Like, politically, it doesn't make sense. No one is given a reason for why that would have been done. And we'll talk about this literal spin doctor who's putting forward the forensic evidence without providing any forensic evidence, Hen Kugel, who has said that they did this. But first, I think it's important to kind of go through what we know about how they died. And their deaths were actually announced in November 2023, at a time when Israel was basically carpet bombing the Gaza Strip. This is from the Guardian in November 29th, 2023. Hamas says 10-month-old hostage Kafir Bibas was killed in Israeli bombing. And they say that Shiri and Ariel have also died. The mother. This information was kept from the Israeli public for the most part. I mean, the Israeli government avoided telling the public that they were dead because it wanted to keep them in suspense. And I don't know if, I mean, we'll probably be demonetized, but so I'll just have to go through kind of the notes. But I would have wanted to have played the video that Yarden Bibas, Shiri's husband, delivered from captivity in Gaza in I think it was early December. During the time when Israel was refusing to extend the humanitarian pause, when captives and prisoners were being exchanged between Hamas and the Israeli government. And Hamas offered the Bibas family remains to Israel, their bodies. And Yarden Bibas appears in a hostage video pleading for Israel to accept their bodies so that they can be properly buried. And I think he was even offered as well. And Israel rejected it and refused. Why? Because it wanted to keep the Jewish Israeli public and the world in suspense, so that when there was a ceasefire and they had to accept the bodies, they could then say, oh my God, they're dead. They killed them. And that would allow Israel to derail the ceasefire and possibly go back to war on Gaza, or at least point the finger at Hamas and deflect from the fact that they had slaughtered 18,000 children in Gaza.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, there was a statement by the field commander who was involved in capturing them. And no one believes, although they've generally told the truth all along, or mostly the truth, Hamas and the various factions in the Gaza Strip haven't really had the same reason to lie as the Israeli military has. These statements just never make it into Western media. But this is a field commander in the smaller and lesser known Mujahideen brigades, which had Shiri Bibas and her two sons who were separated from their father in the chaos of October 7th. The captive Shiri Bibas worked in the office of the Southern Command leader in the Gaza division and previously served in Israeli Unit 8200. That's the cyber security unit of the Israeli army, which spies on people in Gaza and compromises them. And the Israeli government has not contradicted this information. When she was captured, we sent her children with her out of compassion for them, implying that she demanded that her children not be left alone when she was being taken hostage. The Israeli occupation killed her along with her children after bombing them along with their captors. And that's very damaging for Israel. I mean, it blunts the propaganda impact of claiming that Hamas just strangled these children and that they had to do whatever was necessary to stop these savages. So that statement has been ignored. But there's so much evidence that Israel was killing its own hostages in Gaza since October 7th. I mean, we know about the mass Hannibal directive on October 7th. The Israeli Air Force just acknowledged its own orders to carry out mass Hannibal and destroy everything that moved on Gaza. This is new. Yoav Gallant, the former Israeli defense minister, acknowledged the Hannibal directive was employed, which authorizes and orders Israeli troops to attack Jewish Israelis who have been taken captive. And he complained that it hadn't been applied comprehensively enough. But then we've got like the Israeli throughout the whole time. And this is, you can just refer to Wyatt and my article with Wyatt in the Grayzone for a much more comprehensive history of this. But throughout the entire time, the families, since December 2023, since captives started coming out of Gaza, family members and those captives themselves have openly acknowledged that their greatest fear was being killed by Israeli airstrikes. And here is propaganda poster child for the Israeli hostages, Noah Argamani, testifying on behalf of the Israeli delegation at the United Nations, acknowledging that she was attacked by her own country, by her own military while in Gaza, and that two captives she was with, Itai Svirsky and Yossi Sharabi, were killed, and she survived.
I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I thought it's going to be my last second of my life. I screamed so loud so someone would hear me. And I heard Yossi screaming too. But after a few seconds, I stopped hearing from Yossi.
She's talking about Israel bombing her. So, Aaron, I mean, you remember Shiri Bibas, the mother, her body wasn't returned properly initially. And that almost derailed the ceasefire. And what actually happened, according to Hamas, was that they mixed up the bodies because it was difficult for them to actually extract the bodies and keep track of them from under the rubble. So they had returned the body of a Palestinian who was also killed, found under the rubble with Shiri Bibas. Rubble caused by the Israeli Air Force bombing. I mean, it makes sense that they were killed by Israel. You can argue, and it's not powerful enough for Israeli propaganda, but you can plausibly argue that it's Hamas's fault for kidnapping them, taking them into Gaza, and putting them at risk. But the Israelis want us to believe that they were strangled methodically in order to light up the Empire State Building.
And that's why the family, as you guys report on at the Grayzone, has written a letter to the Israeli government asking them to stop making claims about how they were killed.
Yeah.
Because the family itself has been provided no details at all from whatever forensic examinations have occurred. And what they're basically doing is telling the Israeli government to stop exploiting their deaths, just as the Israeli government and its apologists exploited the deaths of Israeli women on October 7th to claim without evidence that they were the victims of rape. And an Israeli family even had to call that out because their daughter, their sister, Gal Abdush, was being used as a poster child of sexual violence when there was actually no evidence to support that. And in fact, they said the family said it was impossible that it happened because they spoke to her right before she was killed on October 7th. And so now we have a similar thing going on with the Bibas family.
Yep. They told Netanyahu to shut up. I mean, they're all but saying that they don't believe this.
Yeah.
But they're not saying it. They're not confirming what Yarden Bibas said explicitly in Gaza.
And I don't fault him for that because he was in captivity when that video was made. So, I mean, that's not, to me, something that I would take the word of. But the fact is, there is ample reason to believe that they were killed in an Israeli strike, including, as you talked about, this is regular Israeli practice, not just the Hannibal Directive on October 7th, but we know that they've killed dozens of Israeli captives ever since. And why wouldn't they when they're subjecting this tiny strip of land, the Gaza Strip, this dense area where people can't escape, to, you know, massive bombing every single day without any regard for who they're killing? It makes perfect sense that Israelis would get caught up in that.
Yeah. Maya Sherman, who was the mother of Ron Sherman, an Israeli soldier, uniformed Israeli soldier, was captured on October 7th, said that her son was killed in a tunnel by Israeli soldiers who pumped diesel fumes into the tunnel in a failed attempt to kind of like fumigate it and kill Hamas militants. And she said her son was killed like in Auschwitz. And she dedicated a gravestone to him, which I think said he was killed by the Israeli military, and they went and destroyed the gravestone. 3 Israelis broke free from captivity in Gaza and were sniped to death by the Israeli military. The one that got away was hunted down by Israeli soldiers and executed at point blank range.
Because they thought because they thought they were Palestinians.
They thought they were Palestinians.
Just as that guy in Miami recently shot 2 Israelis because he thought they were Palestinian.
Yeah. And then the Israelis who were shot and survived by a Zionist American fanatic went on Facebook and claimed they were victims of an anti-Semitic attack.
And said death to the Arabs.
And said death to the Arabs.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's an insane asylum. We're in the Jewish section of Jonestown here. It really makes you wonder, what would they do without Palestinians? They just have to start like dressing up the bad section of their society as Palestinians and playing some kind of Hunger Games. But this is what happened in Gaza. And one of the few hostages who we know for a fact was killed by Hamas, Hirsch Goldberg Pollen, because Hamas had announced a policy of killing hostages if the Israelis attempted these operations to capture them. They were trying to deter these operations because they were killing so many civilians in Gaza in the course of trying to liberate hostages. He complained in his own video from captivity that the airstrikes had nearly killed him many times. Noah Argamani, in her own hostage video, told the truth about what she retold at the UN, that an Israeli airstrike killed 2 Israelis who were with her. The point is, the Israeli authorities, many Israelis wanted to prioritize the captives. And that's why the ceasefire is holding so far, is there's so much pressure on Netanyahu from the Israeli public. So many Israelis wanted that, but the Israeli authorities and Netanyahu's fanatical coalition, the Israeli military, and a broad swath of Israeli society, I do think the majority of Jewish Israelis prioritize bloodlust over getting the hostages out. And there could have been a deal before the Bibas family was killed by what seems like an Israeli airstrike. And there was a deal on the table right there to return their bodies. But Israel wanted to exploit the propaganda impact and dupe its own citizens into believing they were alive. I mean, even Tapper did that on, the American.
And this is just standard Israeli history. Everything is constantly weaponized and lied about to justify aggression. Going back to the founding of the state, there's an excuse for everything. Like when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are ethnically cleansed by the early Zionists, the excuse is, oh, well, that happened because their armies attacked us, and also their armies told them all to flee so that they could attack the Jews and not have the Palestinian civilians in the way. I mean, everything throughout history everything is always used, is weaponized as an excuse to undermine diplomacy, peace, and to justify aggression. And that's Israel falling in that playbook. And as you were saying, they have the corporate media just buying into it every single time.
Yeah, here's an example of that. And this was what the whole propaganda ploy was designed to do.
You're getting at the idea that there should be a two-state solution. I was walking into the studio tonight and saw that the Empire State Building was orange in honor of the Bibas family. I think the idea of a two-state solution died with the Bibas family and the disgusting carnival-like display that was put on by Hamas and the Palestinian people when they were handing those remains back. There cannot be a two-state solution for people who celebrate the death of those little babies.
We're not talking. You're trying to get us off the topic.
You're getting at the idea that they're.
Forget for a second that the two-state solution is a fundamentally unjust solution, because for Palestinians, that would be just 22% of their homeland. It would mean accepting Israel, which, again, especially now, it's hard to ask any Palestinian to do. Forget that for a second. What he's saying is, and this is what Israel anthropologists have done forever, is that Palestinians, he's trying to find an excuse to say Palestinians don't have the right to self-determination. And this is not the first time that someone has said a similar thing. After October 7th, a similar thing. How can we have a Palestinian land when they do stuff like this? And so every new weaponized case of atrocity propaganda is just used to deny Palestinians the right to self-determination, because that's what ultimately the entire Israeli project is about, is denying that. So any excuse possible will just be used to say we can't have Palestinian self-determination because ultimately we're more committed to Jewish Israeli supremacy.
And who cares about all the Palestinian children who were murdered? Who cares about the fact that hundreds of them were prisoners and were tortured, along with Palestinian women held without charges? I mean, when do you see scenes like this in Western media? This is today. These are children who were let out. Many women were returned, and children. Well, many women were kidnapped from Gaza and were taken to Israeli dungeons, and they were let out thanks to Hamas.
What we're showing there on screen, this is someone who was kidnapped as a child. He was literally kidnapped by Israel as a child, and now he's getting out with gray hair. He's been held for 33 years, literally kidnapped, imprisoned by Israel in his teens, and now he comes out with gray hair.
Here's a woman who was kidnapped from Gaza, and what she describes contains echoes of the Holocaust. They started threatening me with my children. They dragged me to Ascalon by my hair, the prison. He told me, who should I shoot first? Referring to her children, Yazan, Jannah, or Mohammed. He threatened me with my children. The entire interrogation was threats to my children. My husband went out to see what was going on. They shot him and directly put him on a helicopter. I got out to see what was going on while I was carrying my son, who's 3 years old. He took him from my arms and told me to shut up. He grabbed me by the hair and dragged me across the ground, saying, "Call out for your husband." And there were bombings above us. And he pointed a weapon at my 3 children. He asked, which child should I shoot first? While interrogating her. Who knows the names of these prisoners coming out, these literal hostages who were abused in Israeli dungeons? Who knows their names? And a lot of them are medical workers too. The Guardian finally acknowledged tons of doctors and medical workers were kidnapped and taken to torture centers in Israel. There's no building that's going to light up here for them. They're just statistics, along with the 18,000 children who were killed. But Kfir Bibas, he looks like a son. He's not American, by the way, but he looks like maybe a white son that some CNN GOP contributor might have had.
Well, that's the thing. There's been this obsession about their red hair. There's so much
they talk about that so often.
Constantly, which is creepy to begin with. And also it speaks to, I mean, what's going on is that they're trying to appeal to people's bigotry and their biases that, oh, because these kids have red hair, you know, which conjures like a white person, then they have more value than the thousands of Palestinian kids with brown hair. Even though, by the way, actually, you have some Palestinian kids in Gaza who have blonde hair. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, it's an attempt at just appealing to racism, and it's gross. It's gross. It's creepy to watch.